What ages are we talking about roughly, in particular with the music study?
The music study is 3 and 4-year-olds, if we're talking about the 2011 study.
Can you tell me a little bit about the study and what overall you were looking to find or looking to take a look at?
Sure. Well, we were interested to see if taking music and movement classes in early childhood is associated with children's improved self-control or self-regulation. So, a lot of parents take their children to Music and Me or Music Together or Music Garden or Kinder Music or Little Hands, these music and movement programs that are very fun and enjoyable for the kids, and they get to learn lots of music and motion and have fun and integrate in different parts of the brain while they're doing activities. And our question was, does having lots of practice doing musical kinds of participation games with instruments, music and movement, games like high and low, or fast and slow, or stop and go, these kinds of things where the music is regulating the child's behavior. And so children have to have control, or what we call self-control or self-regulation, is that they need to know where their bodies are in space and be able to move their bodies the way they want to in order to get their goals done. So in these music and movement classes, they do lots of these activities where they're making music, but they're also stopping and starting and high and low, fast and slow. And the hypothesis was that giving children lots of exercise doing this, lots of practice doing these kinds of games with music and movement, gives them, kind of exercises the self-regulatory system just like any other muscle in our body, that it needs to be developed. And so the question was, children who take these kinds of music and movement classes in early childhood, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, do they show enhanced self-regulation compared to children who don't have access to these kinds of programs?
Tell me a little bit about the study. How many kids did you look at over what period of time?
We had 90 children. About half of them were in the kinder music class. We brought them into the lab in this room actually, and gave them a battery of tests, self-control or self-regulation tests, where we asked them to slow down their behavior, or we see how long they can wait before they get the M&M or the Skittle that they are wanting. And we asked them to not touch an attractive toy and wait until we come back in the room and see whether they can delay their gratification, these kinds of self-control skills that we expect of children when they get to kindergarten, right? So we want them to be able to sit still and follow directions, and these are critical skills for school readiness, and so important to be developing in the early childhood period. And so we gave them a battery of these kinds of tests and gave them sort of a self-regulation score, if you will, with higher numbers being these kids are better at this than others, and then compared whether the children who have exposure to the music and movement classes are doing better on those tasks. And in this kind of study, it's important to control for other family differences that might be present for those who are not taking these classes. So they were demographically similar families who weren't taking these classes. So for example, they had similar parental education and income and ethnic background of the two groups of children, but one was taking these classes for 1 or 2 years before I saw them.
Then what did you find? You had a control group and you had the students in the class. And where did it go from there?
Well, I found evidence that the children who did have experience with these music and movement activities were better self-regulated. So they were better able to slow down or control their motor behavior, as we hypothesized the extra music and movement activities would give for them. And we also noticed an interesting thing, that the children who had these music classes were more likely to hum or sing to themselves during moments where we were asking them to wait a long period while they could just sit there and follow directions. I'll describe the whole task. So we give them a toy that we're wrapping up as a gift, but we forget the bow in the other room. So it's half wrapped up, and we ask the child to wait until we get the bow, and we leave the room and the video camera is rolling, and we ask the child, please don't peek, don't look at this, and I'll be back in a little while. I have to I forgot the bow. And so the camera is rolling, and we see what the kid does during this waiting period. Do they peek, or do they go over and look, or do they talk to themselves, or do they hum or sing to themselves? So the kids who have this exposure to the music classes were doing more humming and singing to themselves, which is a very effective strategy for this task because they need to do something during this period. And so the kids who did something like talking to themselves or singing and humming waited longer to look at the toy or refrained from peeking better than the kids who didn't do that.
What is it about the music that helped with the self-regulation? You mentioned the humming while they were trying to control themselves. What what were researchers able to piece together?
So in the early childhood period, it's a fascinating period because children are internalizing language and other symbol systems of their culture. So a lot of my other work has to do with private speech, which is kids talking to themselves or thinking to themselves. So just like you and I can think, okay, after this interview, I'm going to stop by the store. I need to pick up some bowls and some milk for the party. So we think about these things to ourselves in our head. Well, young children are just internalizing that language, which was used by other people to communicate, but then they start using it to think and to regulate their attention and their behavior and their problem solving. So language is not the only tool that kids can use to regulate their behavior or to think in. They also can use music or movement or other symbolic systems like math or visual kinds of artifacts. So music is another cultural tool that children can use to think to themselves while they're working on something.
You had the kids in a music and movement program. Is there something about the movement, the pairing of the two together as opposed to just passively listening to music?
Correct. So the important is active participation in some kind of musical and dance activity. So just listening to music in the background doesn't have positive effects on self-control, but having lots of practice dancing to the music, bouncing to a beat, right? Because you don't just bounce randomly. You are controlling your movements to the music, and you might have particular movements associated with the song that you're doing, hands up high, hands down low, touch your fingers, touch your toes, stop and go. And it's that practice using music and language to regulate your motor behavior that is what gives the self-regulatory system a boost. Why
are those self-control skills so important when you're talking about school preparedness?
Well, because children have to be able to, in our current educational climate, to sit still for a while, follow directions, not just get up whenever they want, delay their gratification, wait their turn to raise their hand or to go get whatever they want to get. So those are all involving self-regulatory skills that they have to delay their gratification or sustain their attention for long periods of time. And there are different tools that we use in our selves to regulate that.
Is there the thought that these kinds of programs would be beneficial to a certain population, or just across the board it's fun and there's an added benefit?
They're good for everybody. The population in this particular study was largely middle class Caucasian families, but we did have some ethnic diversity as well. But other studies have shown that it works and is useful for children of all sort of economic and income and racial backgrounds. There's some other research showing that music and movement and arts programs in general are particularly useful for kids living in poverty and English language learners. So an earlier study of mine looked at Head Start kids, with many of them being English language learners, and showed that music and movement and dance intervention can help social skills and be a useful tool for kids who are still learning English to be able to interact with other children and participate with them in various ways.
If there was a takeaway message for parents, something you would want them to learn from this research, what would that be?
Well, it's good to sing to your kids and to bounce them on your lap and to dance and do folk dancing and move together. And it seems to be this kind of doing music and movement together and dancing is critical for development of brain and balance between brain and body, and integrating different kinds of systems. There's a reason why all human societies, since the birth of the species, does things like folk dance and has music and moves together. And so one of the things that moving together does for children and for humans is bring a sense of social bondedness and connection with, if you are moving the same way that I am moving. And so there's important sort of human cultural functions of dance. I don't know if this is relevant, but there is actually research with infants, what they call synchronous bouncing. So if you take an infant and you bounce them together and you're bouncing with them in the same rhythm, then that baby is feeling a special connection with you if you are dancing in the same way as the baby is. And so if you have somebody else who you are bouncing the baby and the stranger is bouncing not together but in an asynchronous way, the baby doesn't feel like they can trust that person as much. And so if they are looking for information and trying to get guidance from that new stranger, they appreciate and listen to that person who has previously synchronously bounced with the baby. And so that's just one example of a good outcome of moving and singing, dancing with your baby or your toddler.
If there's anything else, Adam, that you want to add that we had talked about?
We also found that the quantity mattered and the recency mattered. So it was the children who are still in the classes today who were showing the stronger self-regulatory benefits. So we had their whole history of how long they were in these music classes and whether they currently were. And so some of the stronger effects were found for the kids who were currently in the classes. And the kids who had many more months or years of their life taking these music and movement classes did better than the kids who had it for fewer months.
Is there a recommendation out of this then?
The more the merrier. It's a fun activity and it's a great thing for families to do together. In the earlier years, the mom or the parent also comes with the child to these music classes. Later on, that's just the children by themselves, and it's all still good experience.